What makes a person unforgettable? Is it money? Is it fame? Is it power? Or is it something deeper? Maybe it's the strength to rise from pain, to speak truth when silence is easier, to turn every wound into wisdom. This is the story of Oprah Winfrey, a woman who was never supposed to succeed, a girl born in poverty, a life filled with hardship. And yet, she rose, not just to survive, but to lead, to inspire, to change lives, millions of them. This is not a story of luck. It's a story of courage, of vision, and of voice. This is her story. Let's begin. She was born into the world quietly, in the deep south of Mississippi, in 1954. Her name was Oprah, taken from the Bible, but because people kept mispronouncing it, she became Oprah, a name that would, decades later, echo across the globe. But in those early years, it was just the name of a little girl wrapped in poverty and uncertainty. Oprah didn't come from privilege. She came from a wooden house so poor that there was no running water, just a well outside and an outhouse in the back. She wore dresses made from potato sacks, and other children laughed at her for it. But what they couldn't see, what they couldn't understand, was the mind behind the fabric. Her grandmother, a deeply religious woman, raised her with strict discipline and strong faith. By the age of 3, Oprah was already reciting Bible verses in church with such power and presence that the congregation would go silent. Even then, she had a voice. Even then, she commanded attention. But life did not stay stable for long. At the age of 6, she was sent north to live with her mother, a young, single woman trying to survive in Milwaukee. There, life turned darker. The warmth of her grandmother's home gave way to neglect, chaos, and deeply painful experiences that no child should ever endure. She suffered, not just from poverty or hunger, but from things far more devastating, things that threatened to silence her forever. By the age of 14, Oprah had endured trauma that could have broken any spirit. She gave birth to a child who died shortly after. Most people never knew. She rarely spoke of it. And yet, somehow, she went on. Somehow, within that young girl, there was a refusal to collapse. A refusal to accept that this was all life had to offer. She read, she studied, she spoke out loud, sometimes to herself, sometimes to an imaginary audience. Because somewhere in the depths of her pain, she believed there was more. She began to discover herself not through comfort, but through challenge. She was sent again, this time to live with her father in Tennessee. He was a strict man, but a man who saw her potential. He made her read books, study every day, speak with clarity, and think with purpose. And under his roof, something extraordinary began to grow. Not just knowledge, but vision. Not just discipline, but identity. By 17, she was working at a local radio station, reading the news on air with the calm confidence of someone twice her age. By 19, she became the first black female anchor at Nashville's WLAC-TV. A feat that should have been impossible. But for Oprah, impossible was simply something to walk through. The girl who once felt invisible was now being seen. And not just for her voice, but for her presence, her empathy, her truth. Oprah Winfrey had begun to rise. Not because the world invited her in, but because she forced the world to listen. And this was only the beginning. Chicago, 1984. A city of noise, of ambition, of industry. And in the early morning haze of a struggling talk show called AM Chicago, a new name was about to enter the homes and hearts of millions. Oprah Winfrey had been offered a job as host. She wasn't the network's first choice. She wasn't glamorous in the traditional sense. And she certainly didn't fit the mold of what a successful television woman looked like at the time. But from the moment she stepped onto the set, something shifted. Gone was the stiff formality. Gone was the surface-level smile. What came instead was authenticity. She didn't talk at people, she spoke with them. She didn't perform, she connected. She brought warmth, empathy, and vulnerability to a space that had long been cold, rehearsed, and distant, and the audience responded. Within months, AM Chicago went from the bottom of the ratings chart to the #1 talk show in the city. It wasn't a fluke, it wasn't luck, it was Oprah, The station saw what was happening, and they made a decision that would change media history. They gave her the show. Her name would be the title. The Oprah Winfrey Show was born. And so began a journey that no one, not even Oprah herself, could have fully predicted. It wasn't just that she was the first black woman to host a nationally syndicated talk show. It was that she turned the genre upside down. She opened up conversations that others were too afraid to start. About race, trauma, addiction, body image, forgiveness, spirituality, loss, and self-worth. She cried on camera. She laughed without apology. She asked hard questions, but always from a place of care. And the audience, whether in the studio or watching from living rooms across America, felt something they weren't used to feeling on television. Seen. People didn't tune in for spectacle. They tuned in to feel human again. Week after week, year after year, Oprah created a space where pain could be spoken and healing could begin. Her studio became a sanctuary, not just for celebrities or experts, but for everyday people carrying quiet, private battles. And behind the scenes, Oprah wasn't just hosting, she was building. In 1986, she founded Harpo Productions, a move so bold, so rare, that it made her the first black woman in America to own and produce her own talk show. She didn't just want a platform. She wanted power, but not the kind of power that controls. The kind of power that frees. Through Harpo, she launched film and TV projects, published books, created educational initiatives, and empowered countless voices who had long gone unheard. She didn't just build a brand. She built a movement. By the 1990s, Oprah wasn't just a television host. She was a cultural force. A trusted name. A symbol of strength, integrity, and possibility. But through it all, through the accolades, the awards, the empire, she remained rooted in the same truth. That words can heal. That listening is power. And that one honest voice can change everything. By the early 2000s, Oprah Winfrey had already become a household name. She was no longer just a talk show host. She was a trusted voice, a daily companion, and, for many, a kind of spiritual guide. But for Oprah, success was never meant to end with her. Fame, to her, was only meaningful if it could be used to lift others. So she did exactly that. She used her platform to shine a light on people, on issues, on truths that had long been kept in the shadows. She started with books. In 1996, she launched Oprah's Book Club, and almost overnight, the literary world changed. Books by unknown authors became instant bestsellers. Stories that might have been lost to time were suddenly being read by millions. Because when Oprah told people, "Read this," they listened. But it wasn't just about books. It was about growth, about encouraging people to expand their minds, to ask better questions, to think for themselves. And then there was the Angel Network. Her call to action for viewers to give, to serve, to be the change in their own corners of the world. Through that effort alone, Oprah and her audience raised over $80 million for education, housing, and disaster relief. But she didn't stop there. In 2007, she opened the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for girls in South Africa. Not a symbolic gesture, but a school built with intention, quality, and love. A place where girls, many from the most challenging backgrounds, could receive not only an education, but the belief that their dreams mattered. Because Oprah knew, she had once been that little girl. And if someone had reached into her world sooner, everything might have changed faster. So now, she would be the hand reaching in. She mentored, she invested, she gave millions, quietly and consistently, into projects that rarely made headlines but changed real lives. And yet, through it all, she remained Oprah, still listening, still learning, still asking questions no one else dared to ask. She interviewed presidents and prisoners, spiritual leaders and skeptics, the famous and the forgotten. And with each interview, she did the same thing. She looked people in the eye and made them feel seen. That was her gift. Not fame, not fortune, but presence. The kind of presence that heals. That makes the world a little softer, a little safer, a little more awake. By the time the Oprah Winfrey Show ended in 2011, she had taped over 4.500 episodes. interviewed more than 30,000 guests, and reached an estimated 40 million viewers weekly. But her true legacy wouldn't be counted in ratings. It would be counted in lives touched, in minds opened, in girls who now lead because they saw someone who looked like them rise. Oprah didn't just change television. She changed the way we talk to each other, the way we listen, the way we believe in what's possible. Because of her, a generation learned that your past does not define your future. That pain can be a beginning, not an end, and that the most powerful voice is the one that speaks with truth. For all her success, the awards, the wealth, the global fame, Oprah Winfrey has always said that her greatest achievements are invisible. Not the empires she built, but the pain she faced, the wounds she learned to heal, the parts of herself she refused to abandon. Because what the cameras didn't always show was the work she did when no one was watching. The quiet mornings, the deep reflection, the searching for meaning beyond money, beyond milestones. As early as her 20s, Oprah began to understand that real success was not about titles, but about alignment, a harmony between who you are and what you do. She started journaling, she meditated, she prayed, she asked hard questions of herself, of others, of life. And slowly, she built a life that wasn't just outwardly impressive, but inwardly rooted. Oprah never claimed to have all the answers, but she dared to ask them anyway. Why do we suffer? What are we here to do? How do we forgive what feels unforgivable? These questions became the soul of her interviews, her books, her show, her life. She spoke often about intention, about doing everything, even the smallest act, with clarity of purpose. Why are you doing this? What is it rooted in? Is it ego, or is it truth? And perhaps that's why millions trusted her. Not because she was perfect, but because she was seeking, just like them. In 2011, she launched Super Soul Sunday, a series of conversations not about celebrities or headlines, but about meaning, stillness, faith, growth. She sat with thinkers and spiritual leaders from all backgrounds: Eckhart Tolle, Brené Brown, Maya Angelou, Deepak Chopra, and asked questions not to impress, but to understand. It wasn't about preaching, it was about presence, about listening, about making space for the sacred in everyday life. Oprah reminded people that spirituality isn't a religion. It's a relationship, with yourself, with others, with the deeper rhythm that moves through everything. She often said, "You don't become what you want, you become what you believe." So she guarded her beliefs carefully. She fed her soul intentionally. She said no to things that felt empty, and yes to things that made her feel more alive. And even when storms came, the betrayals, the criticism, the pressure of fame, she returned to one question: what is this here to teach me? It was this practice, this unshakable commitment to inner work, that kept her grounded when the world tried to pull her in every direction. She didn't just build a brand, she built a life of meaning. And in doing so, she gave millions of people permission to do the same. To pause, to reflect, to heal, to grow, to believe that their story still has power. She started with nothing: no wealth, no status, no connections, just a voice, a mind, a spirit that refused to break. And from those quiet beginnings, Oprah Winfrey created not only a career, but a legacy. She didn't just change television, she changed the way we tell stories. Before Oprah, talk shows were about ratings. After Oprah, they became about healing. Before Oprah, media was about celebrities. After Oprah, it became about humanity. She showed the world that vulnerability is not weakness. It is the doorway to truth. That compassion is not softness. It is courage in action. Oprah dared to speak the words others were too afraid to say. About trauma, shame, loss, racism, forgiveness, faith. And by doing so, she created space for others to speak too. She became a mirror, reflecting back to people the worth they had forgotten, the dreams they had buried, the voices they had silenced. And beyond the screen, her light only grew brighter. She invested in education, especially for girls who, like her, had been told they weren't enough. She gave scholarships, built schools, funded futures. Through her Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls, she nurtured a generation of thinkers, leaders, and changemakers, young women who now carry her torch into corners of the world she'll never see. And through every dollar she gave, every platform she built, every message she shared, she remained guided by something bigger than herself. Purpose. Oprah Winfrey did not rise just to stand tall. She rose to lift others. That is her legacy. Not the magazine covers, not the Emmy Awards, not even the billions in wealth. Her real legacy lives in the millions of people who believed in themselves because they saw her do it first. It lives in the woman who left an abusive relationship after watching an episode on courage. In the teenager who picked up a book and saw themselves for the first time. In the man who sat in silence and wept because someone finally said, "It's okay to feel." This is what Oprah gave the world. Not entertainment, but permission. To speak, to hope, to begin again. And in doing so, she lit a path that so many now follow. Not just the path to success, but the path to truth, purpose, and peace. Because Oprah Winfrey did not just become a star. She became a light, and that light still shines. In the end, Oprah Winfrey's story is not only about what she built, it's about what she became. She became a woman who held space for millions, simply by daring to be herself. She didn't shout, she didn't force, she didn't demand, she invited people to feel, to think, to reflect, to rise. She showed us that one voice, rooted in truth, can ripple through generations. That influence isn't measured by how loud you speak, but by how deeply your words are remembered. In a world filled with noise, Oprah chose presence. In a culture chasing fame, she pursued meaning. And in an industry built on appearance, she stood on authenticity. She reminded us that greatness does not always wear a crown. Sometimes, it sits quietly across from someone, asks the right question, and waits, without judgment, for the answer. Her story tells us that you don't need to be perfect to lead. You don't need to be born into wealth to create abundance. You don't need to have all the answers. But you do need to be willing to ask the right ones. And perhaps most importantly, you don't need a stadium to make a difference. You just need a room, a conversation, a moment of honesty. Because one voice, just one, can open a door that changes everything. So the next time you feel small, unheard, uncertain, remember her. Remember the little girl in Mississippi, the teenager who spoke too loudly, the young woman who kept going, and the legend who now reminds us all that the real journey is within. You don't have to become Oprah Winfrey. You only have to become yourself. And that is powerful enough. Outro. And maybe that's the truth we forget too often. That the most powerful movements don't always begin with a crowd. They begin with a whisper, a question, a single voice, choosing to rise. Oprah Winfrey's journey is not just her own. It belongs to every person who has ever felt unseen, unheard, unworthy. Her life reminds us that even the quietest voice, when spoken with honesty and heart, can light up the world. So wherever you are in your story, whether you're beginning, rebuilding, or just trying to believe, know this: your voice matters, your story matters, and it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. Thank you for listening.